format tonight. It's going to be Matt Lindemer is going to speak about the cannabis issue for a few minutes, maybe up to 10 minutes. And then Jessica Bickford is going to also speak on that. And there will be time for questions and answers afterward. And then immediately following that, depending on how long it goes, Ryan Harity is here tonight. He's a superintendent. And he's going to speak and take questions as well. So if anybody has any other questions, let us know. We're just here to host the meeting, and you can ask us questions. We may not be able to answer them. So with that, I can hand it over to you, Matt. Go ahead.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Matt Lindemer. I live at 728 Mud City Loop here in Morrisville. I own Lamoille County Therapeutics, which is a CBD company currently, and own Lamoille County Cannabis, which we are hoping will be a recreational adult use dispensary come October 1st of next year. I am from the area originally. My wife and I just recently bought a house out there, and we have an 18-month-old son, and we're very excited about this business opportunity and growing it in the town that we live in and kind of supporting and giving back to the town in a big way. So I get a little nervous speaking around people, so I'm actually going to pass my time off to Andrew Subin, who is an attorney for Vermont Cannabis Solutions, and he will at the very least be able to better articulate what I would like to say. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity, Matt. My name is Andrew Subin. I am an attorney at Vermont Cannabis Solutions. We're a law firm based in Burlington, and we're the only cannabis dedicated law firm in the state. Right now, we're representing about 200 companies that are going to be applying for licenses next year, cultivators, product manufacturers, and retailers. And one of our clients is Matt and Lamoille County Cannabis, and we're so excited about his project here in Morrisville. And we would love to see Morrisville opt in for retail cannabis during this vote. So, retail cannabis is going to has the potential to bring a lot of benefits to Morrisville. Amongst those are job creation. A retail dispensary employs between 15 and 20 people, and these are good paying jobs. I haven't discussed this with Matt, but most of our clients are starting salaries at $20 an hour, and that's the starting salary. There'll be managers and jobs at higher levels that'll make real livable wages. And that's, 20 jobs from Morrisville. And these cannabis industry jobs are jobs that attract young people and retain young people. And all of the towns in Vermont, especially some of the smaller towns and towns in the kingdom, is important to retain our youth and to attract good, young, new people to town. And cannabis does that. In addition to job creation, nationally, we've looked at the statistics, bringing retail cannabis to your town increases residential real estate values. So that floats everybody's boat. Cannabis becomes normalized, and it becomes just another amenity. And if your house is within a short drive of retail cannabis, that increases your residential real estate value. Another benefit to the town is just a direct payment from the cannabis retail business that's in town. I know Matt intends to, if the town opts in and if he can start a retail cannabis business here, he plans to donate a percentage of his profits to the town. And that could be used for whatever the town thinks its priorities are for that money. But 1% of cannabis retail, some of these cannabis retail facilities are doing as much as $10 million a year. 1% of that is $100,000. That's a significant contribution to the tax base of the town. So money and revenue for the town is another reason why opt-in is a good deal. So there's a lot of positives and a lot of reasons to do it. Some people might want to raise some objections to it, and there's still some people who are a little bit worried about what retail cannabis might bring to a town, concerns about underage access to cannabis. In response to some of those concerns, I would say that there's underage access to cannabis right now. And wouldn't you rather have people checking IDs and refusing to allow people under 21 from entering the premises, rather than an unregulated cannabis seller who is probably not checking IDs and probably doesn't care how old the people are. And wouldn't you rather have regular consumers of cannabis be able to buy their product in a store where that product is tested? They know it's free of contaminants, free of pesticides. They know the potency of the product because all that's required to be on the label, as opposed to buying it on the unregulated market where you don't know how strong it is, and you don't know where it came from, and you don't know whether pesticides were used to grow it and whether it's free of contaminants. So just from a consumer safety standpoint and a keeping cannabis away from children's standpoint, a regulated market is way better and way safer for the public than an unregulated market. So that's another reason to allow cannabis in your town. There's some fears that it will cost the town money in terms of needing extra law enforcement and stuff. Those fears have proven to be unfounded. And an example of that is in Massachusetts, the statute that enabled cannabis in Massachusetts required companies to make agreements with the town. And those community host agreements required the companies to pay 3 or 4% to the town to cover these added costs. At this point, 3 years into 3 years into legalization in Massachusetts, those towns are returning that money because the extra costs just have not developed. And I think you'll find after you see retail cannabis come to Vermont that it's just about as exciting as a liquor store. And it really isn't going to cause a need for extra money spent on law enforcement or anything like that. The final point I would like to make, and I appreciate the time, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, is that cannabis is coming to Vermont. Legal cannabis is coming to Vermont. And so regardless of what Morrisville does with opting in, it's going to be in Waterbury, and it's going to be in Barton, and it's going to be in Burke, and it's going to be in Burlington, it's going to be in Winooski, it's going to be in Brattleboro and Bennington and Rutland, and all over the state. And so why would you want your town to be left behind from the benefits of retail cannabis? Why would we not give a guy like Matt Lindemer a chance to start this business and create these jobs and live out his dream? That's the opportunity we have on the ground floor of the cannabis industry next year in Vermont. And I think, it'd be a shame if Morrisville was left out of that. It'd be a shame if Matt's project was left out of that. So for all those reasons, I would encourage the town to opt in the vote tomorrow. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know there's some other speakers, but if anybody has questions, we are doing this all day, every day. And I want to say something before we okay. Yeah. So with that, I'll yield the floor to Kent. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kent Mikas. My wife and I live at 77 Bliss Hill Road. I'm partners with Matt in this venture. We met on the golf course. I'm 70 years old. I'm a retired attorney. I ran my own law office for 30 years. At its biggest, we had 20 employees. One of the reasons Matt has gotten me involved is because he does not have business operational experience. I bring that to our partnership. He has expertise in this field. Neither of us know how to run a retail business because we haven't, but we can guarantee you that we are going to follow the law 100%. We're not selling to any minors. We're not allowing them in the store. We're going to run an absolutely 100% clean operation. That is our unconditional guarantee to the town. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
My question is, can you tell us a few towns that are allowing cannabis retail right now?
Yeah, so we have 29 towns in the state. We have 29 towns in Vermont that have opted in so far. That includes all the towns that I just mentioned, standing up there in Chittenden County, starting with Burlington, Winooski, and then moving out from there. And this is just off the top of my head. You'll have to excuse me if I miss a few towns. Middlebury, Rutland expects to vote on an opt-in on town meeting day next year. We're optimistic about Rutland. Manchester will vote on town meeting day next year. We met with the Select Board of Manchester 2 weeks ago, and that seems very positive. Bennington is already in. and Bennington is very supportive of cannabis. Brattleboro is in, and again, very supportive of cannabis in Brattleboro. Montpelier has voted this in. Waterbury has voted this in. Moving up from there, Johnson has voted this in. Burke, Barton, Newport voted no. Newport had a vote and voted no. Out of all the communities that have had a vote, there's been 4 that have had a vote and voted no. All the rest of the votes have been successful, and the ones in Chittenden County by overwhelming margins, and Waterbury by an overwhelming margin as well. So, so if you contact our office, we can give you the full list. I can't remember more than that off the top of my head. There was a no vote a couple weeks ago in Ludlow, which lost by 17 votes, and it was a kind of an off-date election like the one you're having here. I don't think there was a very big turnout. But the last statewide polls we had when Act 164 was being passed, the voters of Vermont approved retail cannabis, 70% in that neighborhood. So there is overwhelming support across the state for cannabis, and we hope that support is also for retail cannabis on the town level, because that's the next hurdle. The state wants this to happen, and the state wants a nice spread of retail geographically across the state. A town like Morrisville is a really important part of that, and important part of filling out the Route 100 corridor with retail cannabis. So I think the people of Vermont want it. The legislature of Vermont wants it. Hopefully the people of Morrisville also agree that it's a good thing for Morrisville.
Thank you.
Hi, Jess Graham. Thank you for being here. I have a couple just follow-up clarifying questions. One is, Matt has mentioned this to us in select board meetings, I believe, but what is the intended aesthetic of the operation you hope to open? Is it going to be like neon lights and like tie-dye, or is it going to be a boutique? Like, I know the answer, but so if you can tell us that. And then I have a couple other questions.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jess. I have a good idea of what I would like it to look like, and since I think I've stated, like you said from the beginning, it's not going to be, what did I say, tie-dye or bongs and tie-dyes hanging out the window. It's going to be very clean cut, very professional. We have purchased the building in anticipation for this hopefully working out at 76 Stafford Avenue, and we're very confident that we can turn that into a really, really nice, clean cut looking place that doesn't stick out, obviously no neon, nothing like that. We have a nice new logo and good signs and put in the proper parking, and my idea for it is kind of like ski chalet, wood, kind of rustic, cozy. That's my thought process, but we're still going through it.
Thanks. Another question is, and we've touched on this a bit during select board meetings, but is the town at liberty to regulate the proximity to the school? And I think you just also answered the question with your location, but just to understand what the town's regulatory powers are if we pass this.
Yeah, so after the town opts in, you will have the ability to create a cannabis control district, a cannabis control board to make local rules about cannabis. And that could include a larger school setback than what's included in the state law. It looks like the Cannabis Control Board has recommended a school buffer zone of 500 feet. I think Matt's project is not anywhere near a school, so I don't think it's relevant for his project. But yeah, you guys, for example, if you form the local cannabis board, would have the authority to say, state law says 500 feet from a school, we'd like it to be 1,000 feet from a school. You'd be able to say, depending on your reasons for doing so, that we'd prefer cannabis businesses to be in this part of town and not in this other part of town for historic or aesthetic reasons. You would have authority to do all that. and to have it not be near other businesses where it was going to cause a nuisance or cause a problem. And of course, all the towns retain all of their normal authority in terms of zoning and permits. So you have all those normal permitting and zoning processes that these businesses will have to go through.
And then this is my final question. Just so everyone understands, what would be the benefit or drawbacks if the town votes for one article and not another? Like if the town allows retail and not, I'm sorry, it's escaping me, integrated licensees, or would that be a big setback, or can you speak to that a little bit?
Can you explain it, integrated licensing?
So this is, unfortunately, because of the language they use in the statute of integrated license, this has caused a lot of confusion. The integrated license is a license type which is only available to somebody.
Go ahead and stand back up there.
Yes, please.
Because your voice will project more.
What the statute calls and what everybody's referring to as an integrated license is only available to the current medical dispensary license holders. There's 5 of those in the state. And so because under the new law, everybody can only own 1 license, those 5 will convert into 4 potential integrated licenses. If those medical license holders apply for them, they can get integrated licenses. So really, I know you're voting on integrated licenses and you're voting on retail licenses. The dispensaries are where they are. And yes, they could move, but as far as we're aware, none of the existing medical dispensaries are planning on coming to Morrisville. So you know, there is a potential for other businesses to be integrated under the licensing scheme by obtaining the whole set of licenses. You can get a cultivation license, a product manufacturing license, and a retail license, and you can integrate your cannabis company by having that set of licenses, but that's not what they're calling an integrated license. The integrated license is sort of one license where you can do everything, but it's only available to these 4 companies. And as far as I know, they're not coming to Morrisville. I would encourage you to vote yes. I mean, they are looking for new locations. Those are well-funded companies, and those are the companies that have a track record in Vermont. If one of them wanted to come to Morrisville, you know, I don't see why the town would object to it. But I don't think that's in any of their plans. You know, one's in Brattleboro, one's in South Burlington. We know where those guys are, and they're not here. So the real vote, or the real important part of the vote, for Matt's project and for Morrisville is to allow the retail license here. So yeah, that's my explanation of integrated license. It's kind of a misnomer.
So I'm listening to Matt and Andrew. Oh, sorry, Tommy Gardner, News and Citizen and Morrisville resident. I'm hearing Matt and Andrew talk about what they're talking about, and there is good information getting out there, but it's clear that they're obviously advocating for this. And I dare say when Jessica goes up to speak, she's probably going to speak to concerns about it, against it either. Also, I'm just wondering if there's anyone, or if you, Andrew, particularly know of any more objective places to go and look for information about, so voters can have a clearer idea on what to vote on.
Well, I mean, I didn't hear some of your question, but I guess if you're looking for opposing viewpoints on. I was thinking more objective. I mean, I think my statement was objective.
Well, you also said I agree with vote for it.
Well, I do. I think objectively, it's a good thing to do. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I'm not going to cite you to people who I think are giving misinformation and inciting fear of something that we should not be scared of. I think a lot of the people who are wanting to be prohibitionists on this issue and to prevent the legalization of cannabis and the growth of the cannabis industry are doing that based on fears which are baseless. And yeah, you know, there are people who espouse those views, but I'm not going to cite you to those people. I think they're wrong. And I think that cannabis should be, yes, I think I believe in cannabis, that it should be legal, that it should be decriminalized, that it's good business, that it's good for the town, that's good for the state, and good for the country, and internationally as well. So, I mean, those are my views. I'm sorry if I can't answer your question more directly. I don't know that you know, most of the people that I talk to agree with me. And most of the people that have objections, I disagree with them. So that's the reality of it.
Thank you.
That's a good question, though.
Do you want more questions? Do you want Jessica to come up front?
Jessica.
First of all, thank you. I'm Jessica Bickford. I'm the coordinator of Healthy Lamoille Valley. We are a substance prevention coalition working to prevent and reduce youth substance misuse. We are also a program of the Lamoille Family Center. And while I come from a substance prevention lens, I am not here to tell anybody how to vote. We've been following Act 86 and now Act 164 very closely because it does impact youth substance because it does present another legal market. So right now, I'm just going to share some information. We get asked a lot of questions, and I'm just going to kind of answer those questions that we have. So first of all, we encourage everyone to be an informed voter. We've created a quiz with these questions just to have that opportunity to really think through your process when you vote. And thank you all for being here because you're obviously the people that do that. So we've put that together. Also on the backside, these are over on the table. We have, you know, our number one job, and I think everybody can agree on this, both the industry and prevention, is that we want our youth to be substance free. We're not looking to create new youth customers. We want our youth to have the time for their brains to fully develop. We want them to reach their full potential. We do want adult users. We use the word adult use instead of recreational use because recreation is something, it's sports, it's what we want our kids to be doing, and we work really hard in prevention to avoid the term recreational use when we're talking about especially cannabis, which is not recreational for our youth. But we do encourage those adults who have cannabis, because it is a legal substance in Vermont, just like prescription drugs, just like alcohol, to secure that in your home. So there's information over on the table on that. So really, what is Act 164? Act 164 is the retail cannabis. It's referring to the bricks and mortar stores is what you're voting on. You've already talked about integrated licenses, so I'll skip that. And Act 164 legalizes the sale, purchase, taxation of adult use cannabis with regulation, and it establishes the retail market. As you know, towns can opt in. That's the process that you're involved in now. Under Act 164, public consumption of cannabis is illegal. So this does not change that. Act 164 allows 30% THC. So THC is the psychoactive portion of the cannabis plant versus CBD. So there's two separate components there. Act 164 is 30% THC limit for the cannabis flower and 60% limit for concentrates. And again, only adults over age 21 will be allowed entry, sale, or product usage. And product usage is not to be done on site. So these are not like a bar. It would be you would buy and leave. So towns get to opt in to that, as well as voting on the integrated licenses. One of the other questions we often get is, what is the Cannabis Control Board? There's two, in Act 164, there's two things set forth. There's the Cannabis Control Board as well as the Cannabis Control Commission. The Cannabis Control Commission is what you were talking about, that can be set forth at the local level to make those decisions of what you want to see locally. But the Cannabis Control Board is making those decisions at the state level. They convened last spring, and they're still working, and it's really important that you know this. And so they're still in their rule-making recommendation process. They meet regularly. You can go to the state website and you can follow their progress. As of November 2021, right now, there are just, still some decisions that have not been made related to how the law will impact local retailers. So a vote now, not everything has been settled, so that's continuing to roll out. We do know that retail sales may begin October 2022. That's when the licenses will be issued. The integrated licenses for the current dispensaries will be issued in May, but new retailers have to wait till October to get those licenses. So that's the timeline for that process. And then once a retailer has their license, as of October 1st, 2022, they can then begin selling cannabis and cannabis products. So some of the things that the Cannabis Control Board is currently working on is potentially capping local license fees at $100, proposing to the legislature that there could be a tax for opting in for the local towns. Currently, one of the questions we hear is, oh, we're going to get all this local tax revenue. Currently, under Act 164, local towns do not receive tax revenue unless they have a local options tax. No towns in the Lamoille Valley currently have that local options tax. They do have a room and meals tax, which is different than a local options tax. So currently there isn't going to be a tax boon, although that could change if the legislature does vote to change that. One of the other things they're working on is buffer zones. Those were already mentioned. Right now it's recommended 500 feet from schools, but the other things you want to consider as your Cannabis Control Commission is what other youth-sensitive areas are there? Where are your parks? Where are your teen centers? Where are your libraries? Also think about your recovery community, not putting something right next to your recovery center. So if you're going to choose to vote yes on this, being mindful that you're doing it in the best way possible. We've already talked about, the potential for local regulation. That's something we get asked a lot. So you can create some local regulations, but they can't go against what the state Cannabis Control Board does. We were also asked if a town votes to opt in, can they later vote to opt out? And the answer is yes. However, any businesses that were granted licenses during that time are basically, it's that grandfather legacy rights, so they get to stay. So, but that is something, and then, looking down, what are some of the local services that might be impacted by cannabis retail? And we don't have hard scientific data on some of this. I do have a lot of studies that I'm happy to share, but some of this is still rolling out. But we do know, law enforcement can be impacted, medical services, mental health services, which we know right now with COVID, people are struggling in our communities. There are environmental impacts to consider, solid waste management, water and electricity usage, energy systems, traffic impacts. I heard of a story of, in Maine where a store was put in and it totally added a lot of traffic. It was put in a neighborhood. It wasn't in a good spot for one. So those are the things you need to think about. Ancillary businesses, aesthetics of our town. These are some of the things to consider. Also, how might this impact our youth? And this is really why I'm here tonight. In 2018, Vermont ranked #1 for past month usage for our 12 to 17-year-olds. That's #1 in the country. So when we look at our local numbers are actually higher than our state numbers in Lamoille County. In 2019, in Lamoille County, 8% of middle school students and 28% of high school students reported using marijuana in the last 30 days. This is higher than Vermont use rates, which are 5 and 27 respectively. Also, our local youth are using early in life. 2% of Lamoille County middle school students report first use before age 11, and 8% of Lamoille County high school students report first use before the age of 13. Again, these are higher than the Vermont averages, which are 1% and 6% respectively. And this is concerning because it's our kids we're talking about. Research says that about 1 in 10 people who use marijuana become addicted or dependent, and 1 in 6 when using before the age of 18. And those numbers come from the CDC and SAMHSA, which is the Substance and Mental Health Services Association. And we know that increased access to marijuana creates community norming. You talked about wanting to create a norm, and that it does impact our youth, having more access, having it normed. We see this with alcohol, we see this with other substances. There's also another document over there, and it's a letter by the Colorado Child and Adolescent Psychiatric Society. And Colorado is actually working to make stronger warning labels because they're seeing the impacts of high concentrate THC products on people. So any percentage over 15% has increased impacts. And they are recommending that the warning labels in Colorado say marijuana concentrates may cause cannabis-induced psychosis or psychotic symptoms, and that this can occur in individuals with no previous history of psychosis. 2, mental health symptoms and problems. 3, cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, and that's where they call it scromiting. It's screaming and vomiting, and people can't stop because they've used so much. Cannabis use disorder, and suicide attempts or self-injurious behavior. And again, this is people who have no history of this. Once you get into the higher concentrates, I think often people think about cannabis, pot, as the pot that was available when we were younger. That was 2%, 3%. We're talking about 30% and 60% here. So these are just some things for you to consider. Retail cannabis doesn't, there isn't really data saying that retail cannabis is safer cannabis, right? Because our youth can't walk into a store and buy it. So they're not walking in and getting the product that they know is tested. They're still getting black markets, and black and gray markets are often, right there alongside of the retail market. So it's your choice. You can vote how you want, but there's some information for you, and thank you for your time. Are there any questions?
With regard to youth, are there studies of communities that have retail outlets about the increase, decrease, or the status quo among youth use?
Yes, there are studies.
And what do they show?
One of the biggest things that impacts youth is signage and advertising. And so when there's prominent signage and advertising, youth use definitely goes up. And like any study, there's always counter studies, so you have to look at the source of the studies. But there is, and I'm happy to share those documents. There's lots of different studies and scientific journals out there.
So my other question has to do with the retail outlets. Are you going to prohibit people under 21 from entering? And will those people who are under 21 have any access to displays or advertising or any outward manifestation of inducement to use?
Thanks for the question. So no, there will be no anyone under 21 will not only be not allowed in the store, but there will be nothing visible from outside. There will be nothing visible. We plan on having 2 ID checks, one at the door before you even get into where there is any retail any product, and then there will be a second ID check at register when you're checking out. So there'll be 2 ID checks. We'll have the machinery that will properly scan and check all of those. So we plan on, as Kent was saying, we are 100% on the books, keep as legal as any other business runs. And follow up real quick, I don't want to counter anything that Jess said. I'm inclined to, I like the adult use over recreational. I think that's smart. That's a good point. So I like that. I want to add that our company does plan to give back 1% of our net revenue to the town, because Jess is absolutely right. The way it is written right now, hopefully it'll change. The tax revenue that the state makes, they're under no obligation to give that to to towns. So there, like Jess was saying, there's discussion, and hopefully it will change, where they will require the state to give some percentage of some sort to the towns, which would, I will still do my thing, which would add to my 1%, which would make that number much greater for the town. And I want to finalize it with addiction is something that I have dealt with in my life. I'm 3 years sober from alcohol almost. The recovery center here in Morrisville played a big role in that. And aside from company money, if I am running a successful business and making money, I plan on donating in a big way to mental health and to addiction treatment, because it's really important to me. Thanks.
Hi, Evelyn Throne. I'm new to Morrisville, so this is kind of cool to be able to interact with the local government. My experience with cannabis use is sort of similar to his. My daughter, because of an undiagnosed back issue, and chronic Lyme disease, which kind of went undiagnosed also, she ended up on so many prescription drugs, I can't tell you, from oxycodone to anti-epilepsy to go to sleep to anti-anxiety. And one thing compounded the other, to where I didn't know for years whether I was going to get the call if she had died. And everyone is different. And I would not want youth to use pot, and I don't even want grown-ups to use it all that much. But it saved her life. It was how she managed her anxiety, how she was able to sleep, how she worked through the pain till she could get her head clear to get the medical help she needed. And I can't be too against it when that's what it did. I wanted to see it well controlled, very well controlled, but I can't be against it when because that's why she's alive.
It's a question for Jessica, actually. Jessica, you mentioned about the brain development a little bit and youth, and isn't it true that many children's brains are not fully developed until 25 or 26 years old?
Yes,
And
the
so-
brain is still in process, and any substance, whether it's cannabis, alcohol, prescription drugs, will start to rewire those pleasure sensors. And so things like everyday things that would give somebody, joy, being in a drama, doing well on a test, those things no longer give the joy that it should when substances are introduced too early. And those who start using substances earlier are, 6 times greater likelihood that they'll have substance use dependence later in their life, no matter what substance, because of the developing brain.
So those 21-year-olds that on their birthday are going to step into Matt's shop are in danger at that point. Anyway, my further point is, we haven't even heard from the statewide Cannabis Control Board yet. It feels like we're putting the cart before the horse. These folks in the front row seem like lovely people. It sounds great to get 1% back from his business if that happens, and to give to restorative center and recovery programs. But we're not just going to vote on giving this one person a business. We're voting on retail marijuana in the town of Morrisville. And I feel like we're putting the cart before the horse. Regardless of how you feel about marijuana use, that's not the point. The point is protecting our kids and making sure that we are doing the best we can for everyone.
Hi, Laura Streets. First of all, I want to say, in regards to the advertising, I grew up in the era where smoking was rampant. They took away all the advertisement, all the things, which is good, but kids are at an all-time high of smoking cigarettes. So, the issue is, there's a lot of issues with that. However, I'd also like to say I've been in the craft beer industry for the last 20 years in Vermont, worked very closely with the DLC. Almost all these arguments are the exact same arguments they had for craft beer. Running the Vermont Brewers Festival, largest festival in the East Coast, we had to hire ridiculous amounts of extra police because the drunks were going to run wild in Burlington. That was not the case. And again, because it was controlled, and again, it gets into regulation and having responsible business owners. And even when the legislation went up to 8%, 9%, these arguments were there. And again, it's about having responsible vendors, responsibility in parenting and everything. And I have to say, I've known Matt since he was a kid in high school. He's been a vendor of mine at the farmer's market for the last year. We're incredibly lucky to have such a responsible local person because if we don't support somebody local, we're going to have a big company come in because it is big money. So it's inevitable that it's coming, and it may be in Walcott, and the only thing that's going to happen is they leave Morrisville to go and get it. So it's one of those things. So I think we have to accept that it's here, it's throughout the country, and to handle it in a legal, responsible way.
So Eric, can I say something? So you're right. It is, legal. It needs to be done in a legally responsible way if the voters choose to vote it in. And there are steps that towns can take, and there are steps that retailers can take to mitigate the risk factors. In prevention, we look at risk factors and we look at protective factors. And you want youth to have really high protective factors, and you want them to have really low risk factors. And it takes a whole community working together to be able to do that. One of the things that towns can consider with really any sort of adult industry is, what do you want your outlet density to be at? Matt may be a totally responsible retailer. He may be, your local guy, but who's to say that you're not going to have big business try to set up as well? So there's things that towns can do. And Allison Link is our policy and community outreach coordinator, and she couldn't be here tonight. But things like restricting outlet density. So one establishment per 5,000 people, or this many on this per square footage. So there are things that towns can do to mitigate the impacts on youth and families.
I wouldn't be the one that suggested it, but if we get a license, I'm all for a fill out of one
I just wanted to address the one comment about putting the cart before the horse and waiting for more guidance from the state. That's not how it's going to work. The licenses are going to come next summer, and they're going to be issued next summer, and that may be it forever. The licenses they may issue more licenses after next summer. They may not. So it's not like let's wait and see how this pans out in other jurisdictions, and then maybe we can opt in. No. You have to opt in now to be ready to do this next summer. And if you don't, that may be forever giving up the chance to have retail cannabis in Morrisville. So the Cannabis Control Board is still working, and they are still making rules, and we don't know everything. But we know enough to know that Matt's facility is going to be good for the town, and it's going to increase safety for the youth of Morrisville, not make it less safe. So there's no more information than you need than that, and your vote is now. So you got to vote yes.
So can I just end with a statement and then I'll sit down unless there's more questions? Okay. Often we hear the opinion that retail provides safer products in the community and less access for youth. There's actually no data to support that. Healthcare and poison control data is showing large increases in accidental ingestion of high-potency edibles and concentrates by infants and toddlers. These accidents are increasing in great volumes in states that have opened retail markets. Thus, the market is the source of these sophisticated cannabis products. Data also shows, and I have a whole sheet that will gladly email you of these sources. Data also shows that cities and states with retail cannabis markets have higher youth use rates proportional to the number of locations and whether or not they are located near youth-frequented areas like schools and playgrounds. The market is driving those increases. In towns that have opted in, prevention aims to work to decrease the harms associated and implement density caps and location buffer zones. So thank you for your time.
Matt got me involved because I have experience running a business for 20 years and he doesn't. I'm involved because I use marijuana recreationally, but my wife has Crohn's disease and peripheral neuropathy. She uses the marijuana to stay off drugs. That's why I'm getting involved in the business.
Thank you. Any other questions about cannabis? All right, let's talk about the school vote. What a segue. So tonight we have Ryan Harity, is that correct?
Yes.
I guess you're gonna go up there.
It's not that we don't care about school.
Better stay away from the school.
Yeah. I guess cannabis and ATVs might be a little more exciting than my topic tonight, but.
You had to mention ATVs.
Yeah, I want to keep the people here. Yeah. No, my name's Ryan Harity, and I'm your superintendent of schools here in Lamoille South Unified Union. And I was asked by the select board just to come and answer any questions that you might have. Prior to that, I thought it might be helpful. Some people might not have all the information, or might not have, or might be new to the town, or might not have a timeline on, kind of how this vote came about. So I thought it might be helpful just to provide a quick timeline around why we're here tonight. And so in the spring of 2021, there was a group of citizens in Stowe that put together a petition to withdraw from the school district. So that petition was brought to the town. The town asked the question, is this legal? Are we were just put through a forced merger process. Is it legal for us to actually withdraw from the Unified Union School District? So at the time, there were two legal opinions that were obtained. There was one that was from the Agency of Education. So the Agency of Education issued a legal opinion and they said, no, this is not legal. A school district that has been forcefully merged cannot unmerge. The town of Stowe then went out and obtained their own legal opinion, and their legal opinion said, yes, it is legal for you to actually withdraw from the school district. So obviously that's pretty confusing for voters and citizens around the process. So the town of Stowe went through the voting process, and the citizens approved to withdraw from the school district. And with that, it needed to be ratified by the Secretary of State. The vote was ratified. And when the vote was ratified, then there became an obligation on the other towns in the district to vote whether or not to approve the withdrawal. And that is why we're here right now. So the town of Morristown, based on statute, has an obligation to vote whether or not to approve Stowe to withdraw from the Unified Union School District. And Elmore and Morristown both have to vote on the same day. That's why the vote is scheduled for December 7th. So with that, there are a lot of questions that may come up that, to be honest, the information does not exist. And so some of the questions might be, there's been different legal opinions. Will the Board of Education at the state level take up this vote and allow it? And the answer is, we don't know. The question might be, how could this impact tax rates? The answer is, we don't know, and there is no way to project that right now. The answer could be, there's a variety of questions that could be asked here. And I think probably the biggest issue here is the statute and the way that the Act 46 statute was written didn't clearly outline how a district how a school or a town can withdraw from a unified union school district and what process it would go through. And so that statute will hopefully be rewritten to articulate when a town wants to withdraw, how will they show that this will improve educational quality of students, will improve the financial operations of the district and the budgeting process, and then bring that to the state board for withdrawal. Right now, that statute is not clear, and that's why there's a lot of questions that can't be answered. So that's really the information that I have to share in as objective a way as I can possibly share it for Tommy back there. But I am more than willing to answer any questions that you might have, with the caveat that I might not have the answer because the answer might not exist, and that's the info that I have.
Understanding that there's more questions than there are answers available. Elmore on the same day has a two-step ballot or a two-item ballot, and they're voting to do the same thing Stowe did. Morristown and Elmore are in this position right now to ratify what Stowe did. Is there any sense of if Elmore votes yes on this, that Stowe and Morristown are going to have to then go back to the polls and ratify Elmore's decision?
So based on the statute, if Elmore votes to withdraw, then Stowe and Morristown would be obligated to hold a vote to allow the withdrawal or not allow the withdrawal. There is no timeline on that though, which is an important thing to know.
You probably can't answer this, but you're telling me that they made us merge. Now that somebody's pulling out, they're making us ratify. Making us. So we just called an election special to ratify this, and you're telling us it's not going to do any good because it's not allowed. Let's see. Can you get an answer for us?
What I would say is that there's different opinions on whether or not it's allowed, right? And there's been different legal opinions on whether or not it's allowed. And so the only real way for it to be determined is to go through this process and be taken to the Board of Education and see if they decide to take it up as a vote. So that's, I guess that's.
My name's George Cormier, if anybody doesn't know. My question to you, and again, understanding it, is it's likely that this will probably end up in the courts. We've got two opinions, two legal opinions. My suspicion is the Agency of Education is not going to just back off a view that says forced mergers cannot dissolve themselves because they forced us into it. They're not, to me, they're just not going to give up that place. So Morristown is already living through one multi-year fight with an agency, a state agency. Water and Light has been fighting with Agency of Natural Resources for years and has spent, somebody's got a better number than me, but a lot of money in legal battles. And they're still nowhere. And you can take either side of whether the Green River Reservoir's actions are appropriate, inappropriate. That's not what I'm trying to debate. But it looks to me that if Morristown and Elmore, since we both need to say yes to this, that's not going to be the end of it. That sounds like, okay, Stowe can go. But Stowe can't go until the legal opinions get sorted out. Who's paying for that?
So I asked that same question. So, I started here July 1st. And one of the first things I did was I reached out to understand what our obligation was as the school district to be involved in this process. I want to make sure we were doing everything that we were required to do. When I reached out for legal advice on that, we were told that this is a town matter and not a school district matter. So this vote was put forward by the town of Stowe, And so therefore, it would have to be carried out by the town of Stowe. So if the Board of Education does not decide to take up this vote, it would be up to the town of Stowe for how they would like to proceed with next steps. So that would not, from my understanding, and I'm not an attorney, so I want to be clear on that. My understanding, though, is that the school district, this is outside of the school district's process. And to speak to your point about multi-year battles and situations, you know, I want to be really clear that our school district right now, our teachers, our educators, our students, our families are doing a phenomenal job. Our school board is doing a phenomenal job. And this has not been a distraction to our teachers and students right now. And I don't intend to let it be a distraction for the kids that are in our classrooms. So I will always keeping our attention on the kids.
And I'm confident in that in all three communities, education is going to be just fine. That's not at all my question, in whatever format, whether we continue in unified union or whether we go back to, in essence, what might have been 10 years ago when there were 3 school districts and a supervisory union. The hesitance in all of this is assurance that as a Morristown resident, I don't want to be paying for Stowe's request to get out. If Stowe wants to get out, and frankly, I think Stowe should want to get out. They got forced into this. They got bamboozled into it. They didn't want it. Alternate studies had been done that said there was no real gain to doing this. Proposals were put before the Board of Education, and they basically ignored them, and Stowe got shoved in. I get why Stowe wants out. But I don't know that Morristown and/or Elmore, but this is a Morristown meeting, so Morristown should incur the expenses of resolving it. So if we're voting yes to let them out, to me, there's got to be the caveat, but we're not paying for it. If there's a fight to be had, it's Stowe's fight. And if they can get the state or the courts or the Supreme Court to say, you got to let them go, great. But if this is going to come back for 1 cent back to Morristown or Elmore, that shouldn't be what's going on. It shouldn't be in the school budget, that's for sure. I wouldn't see the legal expenses of resolving this shouldn't be in the unified union budget at all. That's for education, not for that. But could it be that the town of Morristown, because they are the appropriate body to bring this vote up, is going to be then confronted with, on some allocated basis from Stowe that says, well, Morristown's like 43% of the school board, so you guys owe us 43% of the budget. And whether it's my left pocket or my right pocket, if they've got to tax us for it, and then it becomes, well, we can't buy the new snowplow, or we can't do this, or we can't do that. I'm very concerned about that, which leads me to the next question, and I don't think anybody has this one. This is, I know the other votes are all advisory, correct, Bob? This is, the ATV vote is advisory. The cannabis is binding. Okay. This is a binding vote on the school, correct? So this is a heck of a time to be asking people with very limited information. I understand you're tied up. I get it. This is like a nightmare of situations. But for people to be asked to say yes or no, when there's literally no information about what's the next step, is like saying, take one more step off the deck of the Titanic right now. We don't know where we're going to fall. And, well, you can't answer that, and I'm not asking you to. This just seems like an unknown right now. And if we get down the road of Morrisville Water and Light, which I hope we don't, this is going to be 5 years, and we're still not going to know whether we've got it resolved or not, and we'll have spent somebody's going to spend a bundle of money. And I guess I just don't want it to be us, because we're not asking, we're answering. So I guess that's more of a statement than anything else, but thank you.
I'm asking permission to speak. I'm a Stowe resident. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead. We've had some
Okay. Yeah, thank you. My name is Tiffany Donza. I'm a resident of Stowe. I began serving on the Stowe School Board in 2017, and I also served on the Lamoille South Supervisory Union School Board for both years that we were in existence in that structure. And now I serve on the LSU Youth School Board. But I'm speaking personally tonight, and I'm not going to share any opinion or anything, but I will speak objectively, as Tommy asked, because, George, you brought up a lot of good points about who's paying for what. And in a merged district, in the LSUU, what that means from a budget and taxpayer position is that the towns have different tax rates, but we are voting on one budget across all 3 towns. And the majority vote passes those towns. That is the same for school board members. The structure of the LSUU board is 3 seats need to be held by Morristown residents, 3 seats are held by Stowe residents, and 1 seat is held by an Elmore resident. But those school board members, again, are voted on across all 3 towns, and the majority votes in those members. Does that make sense? So, the current situation of our schools, our education, as Ryan said, is going really well. All of our school buildings have pretty big capital needs. And prior to the merger, there was an EMU capital committee and a Stowe capital committee. And those committees came up with estimates. And I can't speak to how EMU ended up, but Stowe decided not to put forward our bond because it was right prior to waiting to see if the state would merge us. But the Stowe School Board would have gone forward to ask the town for, at that time, that was 2019, about $30 million was a rough estimate. EMU was roughly 10 to 12, I think, is what they were looking at. So the LSUU board just formed a capital committee, and we're going to be taking on residents and going forward with capital planning. When we come up with numbers for these school buildings, they will be put to the voters through the budget for bonds. And again, they will be voted on across all 3 towns, and the majority vote will pass the votes. So when you say who's paying for what, in our district, we do not share schools. So Elmore and Morristown share schools, but Stowe and Morrisville and Elmore don't share schools together. So when those capital bonds are passed, it's essentially one town is paying a tax rate for capital improvements on school buildings that their resident children don't attend. That's all I want to say.
I understand that perfectly. If I said who's paying for what I meant was in the legal fees around resolving a potential difference of opinion of legal opinions around the demerger. I absolutely understand everything you just said.
Yeah, I just wanted everyone to understand
Yeah.
what it means to be in a merged district in terms of taxpayer and budget.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Ryan? General comments?
Ryan, you might have already answered this, and I was not with you. What happens if we vote no, that Stowe can't go?
If Morristown votes no, then it's done.
Then there's no legal battle, and nothing goes to the state board to ask for permission of anything. It's just done.
Correct.
I just got one scenario. You were talking about Elmore is having 2 votes on the same day. One to allow Stowe to secede from the union, and one to allow Elmore to secede. Now, if Stowe is allowed to secede by both towns, then who votes on whether Elmore can secede or not? That only leaves one town, Morristown.
So Stowe would have to it would still have to be approved by the Board of Education. So it would be, really, Stowe would be the first test on a unified union school district to go to the Board of Education to see if they'll allow them to unmerge. So that
And
would
if they were allowed to unmerge, then it would be up to Morristown to either allow or disallow Elmore. Is that correct? There would only be one vote.
I think it's going to depend on the timeline and when that vote would be held and whether or not, Stowe is allowed to withdraw based on the Board of Education taking it up or not taking it up. Really, it's all going to hinge on what happens with the Board of Education.
Right, I understand that, but it was just a what-if scenario, but, yeah, I guess no need to complicate it anymore.
Brian, I'm wondering if you can speak to the pros of being part of a unified union, what the students and or staff have benefited, or anyone who I guess wants, but I feel like you'd probably be the pro in that realm. What are the benefits I've heard? For instance, Morristown students can play lacrosse and hockey. Just curious, what are the benefits of staying in the union?
I mean, I guess I didn't really intend to put together a presentation or share a long list of those. Right. So I'm not really prepared to go through that process right now. What I would say is that the biggest, I think, change, right, is in governance structure, not in the quality or the education that our students are currently receiving, if they're in one structure or another. So I think our teachers are collaborating. I think our teachers have collaborated for a long time. I think most students that you would ask right now what has changed over the last 5 years would probably say, I don't even know we did change, right? Or did we change? I think the student experience, the teams have been inter-district for years. And so I think it's really a governance question is what's being asked. And it's, really a town question. So I hope that answers that question.
Any other questions?
Can I ask something?
Go ahead, and Tommy's going.
In a larger picture, this looks like it's pitting town against town. And that shouldn't be the way it is. Maybe it was an unintended consequence. However, with the scenario of the school building in Stowe, and the residents want their children to have an updated school, a vote throughout the unified district, there are enough voters in Morrisville and Elmore combined to outweigh the voters in Stowe. And that issue could get voted down by people that don't have kids in that school. A year later, Morristown wants to do the same thing. How much support is the town of Stowe going to give to that? It really is pitting town against town. I don't know if the state has thought about that, but towns need to recognize the fact that we've been thrown into this, and cool heads will prevail. And I don't know which way the vote's going to go, but there's so many other things going on here that, to me, it's nervous. I don't know which way to vote. I don't know what's right.
I'm going to inadvertently make it more complicated. About a month ago, Bob, you'd mentioned about a month ago at a select board meeting that you and others had mentioned too that they'd heard about a petition in Morristown floating around to do the exact same thing that Stowe did in May and the thing that Elmore is doing next month. Any update whether that can be expected as well?
We haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
And there's no need for one because we're already going to the vote. We were forced into the vote because of Elmore.
Right.
So we didn't have a choice whether we got a petition or not. We had to go for the vote.
Now I was talking about more of a petition.
Petition to withdraw.
Also.
Oh, for us to withdraw?
Yeah.
Morrison?
Yeah, that was covered. Any other questions? Richard, you're pretty quiet back there. Don't you have something you want to say?
Thank you. Richard Bland from Stowe. Thank you, Bob.
So I'd like to put a little bit of response to Ryan's comments. Yes, Richard Bland from Stowe. I'm a lawyer,
and I served on the Stowe School Board for 6.5 years. We were, all three communities, Elmore, Morristown, and Stowe, while Elmore and Morristown was one school district and Stowe was an independent school district, we were forced to merge by the state of Vermont in 2019, the Board of Education. Ryan had mentioned that there is been no town that has been allowed to withdraw from a forced merged district. That is incorrect, and I would suggest that you can find this as a matter of fact. The Board of Education had before it 3 towns, Westminster, Athens, and Grafton. That is a forced union. It is not a unified union school district, but it is a forced union school district. And the town of Westminster voted to withdraw from that union. And that was after the town of Stowe had voted to withdraw from our union. And the town of Westminster went before the State Board of Education. And the State Board of Education allowed the town of Westminster to leave that union. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, the vote in Stowe was 1,068 in favor of withdrawing from a forced marriage. 464 people voted against it. So it was an overwhelming vote. And Ryan is correct that under state law, as Ms. Bickford said, you're forced now to vote on whether or not to ratify Stowe's withdrawal. So the question becomes, why? And for Stowe, it was, as I believe it'll be for Morristown, to regain control on a governance level of what we spend to educate our students in our communities, where those students go to school. So, for instance, in Morristown's proposed 10-year town plan, there is a chapter 6, on education, and it deals with capital spending. So Tiffany mentioned about the capital needs of our schools in the communities. Stowe is projected to need in excess of $25 million. Morristown, at least by the most recent study, is proposed to expend costs on capital improvements that exceed $1 million. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, so the capital improvements, that's an issue. Number 2, in that town plan, the proposed town plan, particularly on the bottom of page 36, it not only goes through the capital needs of the schools in Morristown, but there is an emphasis that on the vibrancy of Morristown, the center, that the high school students in Morristown be able to walk to People's Academy. What has been studied by professional consultants retained by the Lamoille South Unified Union School Board, most recently in April of this year, 4 of the 5 options that these consultants came up with, because we operate 2 side-by-side K through 12 school systems. They came up with 4 or 5 options to reconfigure the schools, the middle and high school, reconfigure elementary schools. They came up with busing students from one town to another. So the idea that you want to keep your students, to regain control of where your students go to the school, that's also at issue here. So yes, in Elmore, there was a petition. It was a voter-backed petition, and they are voting on December 7th, not only on whether or not to withdraw from the Unified Union, as we did, but they are also voting on whether or not to ratify us. And we're asking our neighbors given our overwhelming vote, to revert back to an independent school district and work with, under a supervisory umbrella, Morristown and Elmore as we did before. Because one thing that has happened, if you look at, since we were all forced to merge, our taxes have gone up. That is irrefutable. The cost per pupil spending of the communities, Morristown, on the eve of when we were forced to merge by the state of Vermont, spent over $14,000 per equalized student, as Stowe did. Right now, we're spending over $17,000 per equalized student in the 3 communities. That's an 18% jump in 3 years. So where was the savings on this forced marriage? When costs have gone up, taxes have gone up, and what we had before wasn't broken. It didn't need fixing. And yet, we're seeing some student decline in enrollment. We're seeing some decline in outcomes. And I completely agree with Ryan. The teachers, the staff, the students, everything. This is about governance and regaining control on a governance level, and then working as we did before, where we had high schools that were ranked by U.S. News and World Report. Right now, since the forced merger, we're no longer ranked at all. So this is Stowe. Yes, it's Stowe, but we want to come back and revert back to what we had that was working so well and was working cost efficiently, and we want to regain, we have no control over the revenues in this state with our school system. The money comes in, it goes to Montpelier. What we can control and what we can see as towns is what we spend on our students. So Tiffany mentioned all of these votes on all LSUU issues are aggregated. We don't know as a town. You don't know, Morristown doesn't know as a town, and Elmore doesn't know as a town how each town votes on that school budget. You don't know. So the transparency, there's less transparency to the voter. It's not just electing school directors. It's the actual budget itself. So I could go on, but I do want to suggest that, yes, there were conflicting legal opinions. The State Board of Education has spoken in the forced merger. So we're perfectly willing to go back to the State Board of Education and refer to the town of Westminster.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
I just want to clarify one thing because Richard said I was incorrect about something. So what I stated was it was a unified union school district. So LSUU is a unified union school district. And so we would be the first unified union school district that goes to the Board of Education to be dissolved, which is sounds like a minor technical difference between a union school district and a unified union school district, but it's actually a technically very important thing from the Board of Education's perspective. So regarding the structure of the state's funding formula and everything there are many issues around capital improvement process and the importance of local control. But from a technical standpoint on how the Board of Education views this legally and whether or not they take it up, the technical pieces are going to be extremely important. So just to clarify that piece.
It just sounds like all of this is like the state mandating things to the towns that's going to cost the towns more money in the end. Really. It's unfortunate because we're all going to be paying.
That's what I said. That's what I was asking. 'Cause already, this election is a special election. We just
costs money.
passed out ballots, and the reason we did it was because of the school. If we could have waited for town meeting, But now we're paying extra, and we're probably going to keep paying extra by the sounds.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's fair.
Laura's got a question.
So, no, mine, so can we send the bill to Elmore since they're requiring us to have this election? It's costing us like $10,000. It's crazy.
All right.
This is a technicality. So if Morrisville is not part of, down the road, not part of the union, how does that impact staffing? Like, right now, are we saving money with consolidating human resources, staffing, that type of thing, administration in one district? Will that cost the taxpayers more money to cover those expenses, or is that sort of like an unforeseen down the road? We don't know.
I wouldn't pretend to know the answer to that question because we haven't done modeling based on the state's legal stance on the issue. So I wouldn't be able to give a fair answer to that question.
All right. Thanks,
All right.
everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight.